want to talk about the infected blood inquiry, which has been in the headlines quite a lot over the last couple of months. Ken Clarke, who was Health Secretary, he gave evidence not that long ago. But today, Norman Fowler, Lord Fowler, he was Secretary of State for Health and Social Security from 1981 to 1987. And he's been giving evidence today at the inquiry, which I think is quite a momentous day in a way. So I'd like to look at what's happened at the inquiry today with Norman Fowler's evidence. Joining me is Mark Ward, who is a victim of the contaminated blood scandal. He's a taintedblood.info committee member and founder of the Homosexual Twitter feed. Now, Mark, it's great to talk to you. I first came across you when you were on my friend Richard Sefton's podcast, State of Mind. And it was a podcast that lasted for 2 hours, and you told your story of your life as a haemophiliac and how you contracted it and all the rest of it. And it was just a gripping conversation. And I'm going to have you back to talk about that in more detail on another occasion. But you were there today at the inquiry, listening to Norman Fowler's evidence. Just take through some of what he said.
I was. Good evening, Ian. Nice to speak to you. Yes, I think I agree with what you said. It was quite a big day for the inquiry because we finally had sat in front of us today the former Secretary of State for Health, the man who was responsible for the department when the AIDS crisis hit. And some of the evidence we heard today was how the Department of Health were gathering information. And it feels very much like, from what we heard, that they were picking up bits from America, not really taking too much information on what was going on in Europe. But it's a powerful person to have in front of you.
One of the things that I think he said was that David Owen, when he was health minister in the Labour government in the mid-1970s, in 1975, he said he wanted Britain to stop importing blood products. And Norman Fowler told the inquiry by the time he got there in September 1981, it was too late for him to influence the outcome of the import. So that if David Owen's advice had been taken and we'd gone for self-sufficiency as a nation, then much of the ensuing tragedy, these are his words, not mine, much of the ensuing tragedy, probably not all of it, but much of it could have been avoided. Now, you hear that and you think, well, why weren't his words heeded?
Actually, as a layperson, I have struggled with this very issue. Lord Owen, David Owen, when he gave his evidence, he spoke about the need for protecting the nation's blood supply. We're not just focusing on the haemophiliacs. This is the population of the United Kingdom. We were becoming reliant on bringing in blood products. Yeah. And the World Health Organization made this directive that all countries that possibly could to secure their own blood supply go self-sufficient. So money was put to one side by David Owen and in 1975. And like Lord Fowler said today, by 1981, that hadn't the process of building BPL, the British laboratory products in Elstree, where they made the blood products. It took nearly 10 years. And unfortunately, Britain never made self-sufficiency. And in that time, had steps been taken to eradicate hepatitis B and hepatitis viruses, many of the haemophiliacs would have actually been saved. I'm certain that I would have been spared HIV and a number of other pathogens. Hepatitis, maybe I could have been spared. But in 1977, I was put onto American blood products, and that's where potentially all of my infections came from.
And thinking back to what I heard you talk about on the State of Mind podcast, there have been various times over the years where you thought that was it, that you well, in fact, a lot of the medical people thought that was it as well, and miraculously, you're talking to me today.
Actually, that's all they kept saying. It was, in a way, it was really quite cruel, and I think I would probably say it was a bit abusive, because I had been told at the age of 14, I wasn't going to live long enough to leave school. I did leave school. I then followed my dreams. I wanted to work for an airline and work with aeroplanes. And I was told to my face, someone like you will never work for an airline. And I went on and had a successful career with British Airways. And my career was totally destroyed by the onset of full-blown AIDS. And I was told that I was also dying from hepatitis C because I had cirrhosis of the liver. And yeah, it is pretty much a miracle that I'm here today. And I'm speaking to you today and attending the inquiry for all those little boys and all of my friends that were lost and taken from us. So while I've got a voice, I'm speaking not just for me, but I'm speaking with them in my heart.
Do you think that this inquiry, when it eventually reports, which I think isn't going to be for some time yet, do you think it is going to get to the truth? And how important is it for people in your situation that it does get to the truth?
I think it has to get to the truth. And I do believe in Sir Brian and his team. We've already heard evidence that has actually vindicated a lot of what we've said. I mean, some of the haemophilia consultants referred to us patients as applying guerrilla warfare on them. And some of the comments that, we're talking about damaged people, vulnerable people who were harmed because of the treatment they were given by the NHS. But I think with this, it isn't just, if they can do this to a small group of people and by almost saying, well, as it's only haemophiliacs, as Ken Clark said, they don't really matter. So if it starts with the haemophiliacs, where does it end up? And we need to focus on this, the same as other disasters. We need to get to the truth of it and find out. For future generations, that's what I want. I can't be saved because I can't be uninfected. But everything I do now, I'm doing to ensure that nobody else, haemophiliac or otherwise, ever goes through what I've gone through.
I probably should have asked you this at the beginning of the interview, but just define what is a haemophiliac.
A haemophiliac is, I was born with a bleeding disorder. So if I cut or bang myself, I don't stop bleeding. So if, say, for instance, you get a shaving cut, it doesn't just pour with blood, it just doesn't stop bleeding. It just literally keeps dripping. And if you bang yourself, where you would get a bruise, the bruise bleeds internally. And that's the crippling effect, because when it gets into the joints, it literally pushes the joints apart, and over time it causes arthritis and a breakdown in the joints and leads to, unfortunately, real disability. And if you bang your head, that can be life-threatening.
And so inevitably you would have had to have many blood transfusions over the years, and that's how you would have contracted HIV.
The treatment for haemophilia isn't actually a blood transfusion. It's if you know when you see in the hospitals that the red bag of blood, that would be a blood transfusion. For haemophiliacs, what they did was they would take, when people kindly went and donated their blood, they would take up to sometimes 60,000 donations, so 60,000 pints of blood, put it all into huge vats and mix it all up. You only need one, or a couple with viruses in there, and every single batch is then it's contaminated. So they would then take those 60,000 units and turn it into millions of bottles of a freeze-dried, the protein, it's like a little white cake, and that's mixed with sterile water and then injected directly into your veins. So we were getting that. And because in America they pay donors, unfortunately at the time, in the 70s, they called them skid row donors, so it was homeless people. They actually targeted the gay community.
And prisoners, wasn't it?
Prisons, yes. Yeah. That actually also happened here. They would get blood from prisoners and borstals.
Well, look, in 8 or 9 minutes, we cannot get into the depth of this in as much as I would like to. We will have you back either live on the programme or on one of my podcasts, because you have an absolutely fascinating story to tell. If you want to hear more from Mark, do listen to Richard Sefton's State of Mind podcast. It was a few months ago, so scroll back through the back catalogue, but it's an amazing story, and I'm really grateful to you, Mark, for telling us about Norman Fowler's evidence today. Thank you very much indeed. That's Mark Ward. You can find him on Twitter at the Twitter feed Hemosexual.